The tragic cycle of Yoruba history. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. History repeats itself, first as tragedy, second as farce. Words of Wisdom by Karl Marx. The only thing that we learn from history is that we fail to learn. The citations above have intermittently found resonance in Yoruba history. The perspective they embodied has been read into such historical landmarks as the Afonso Alafin crisis, the Obafemi Awolowo Ladoke Akintola feud, the Afenifia Ebola Ige schism, and now the Bola Tinubu, Ayemi Osinbajo broken relationship. The repetitive inference of betrayal as leitmotif is a flawed anecdotal interpretation of reality in almost all the instances. The favorite departure point of this historical retrospection is the tragic 19th century socio-political implosion of an inchoate and incipient Yoruba nation. The Aona Kakanfo, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Afonso was the ill-starred political Judas who plotted with wily external forces to vanquish the Alafin, the political sovereign of the Oyo Empire. The consequential fallacy of this narrative lies in the fact that Afonso had militarily prevailed over the Alafin ever before his path crossed with Alami, which encounter turned out to be his death warrant and the proximate cause of the appropriation of Ilorin into the Sokoto Caliphate. As I have reiterated on this page, Afonso was a villain quite all right, but only as the most prominent of many rebellious warlords who had little consciousness or notion of the Yoruba national unity that we now presume and take for granted. He was notoriously guilty of violating the political order and stability of the empire, but little is said on the pertinent mitigation that his agent provocateur role was substantially provoked by a fellow rogue political sovereign, Alafin Aoli. What has been historically interpreted as treachery was an unintended consequence of a self-destructive violation of the political order. He obviously did not anticipate the short-term consequences of his action, let alone the ensuing long-term ramifications. Given the nature of military alliances that were contracted by Yoruba warlords in the 19th century, they did not categorically perceive the Fulani as a corporate enemy with the ulterior objective of subverting and incorporating the totality of the Yoruba society into the Sokoto Caliphate. This history resonated 1.5 centuries later in the Obafemi Awolowo Ladoke Akintola feud. I had the distinct privilege of being called forth to deliver the first Ladoke Akintola memorial lecture 20 years ago. Why me? Following upon the precedents of my dad, Chief Ojuola Osuntikan, and my uncle, Professor Kinjide Osuntikan, and against the run of popular imagination, I have been unapologetic in publicly and objectively identifying with the memory of the late and last Premier of the Western Region, Chief Ladoke Akintola. My dad was regional minister from 1955 to 1966, straddling the premiership of Chiefs Obafemi Awolowo and Ladoke Akintola. More significantly, he opted for the Akintola faction in the factional crisis that ensued within the ranks of the Action Group, AG, in 1962. In taking this stand, he was led by his conscience and conviction. He was only one of 2 ministers exonerated and exculpated of any act of corruption or wrongdoing by the Justice Code ESO panel, set up by military governor Adekunle Fajui in 1966 to probe the Akintola government. According to Oladisu of the Nation newspaper, Osuntikan served the people of Western Region without enriching himself. He shone as a politician, and he shunned corruption. To the political icon from Okamisi Ekatai, contentment was great gain. As Minister of Lands and Housing, he was responsible for the creation of the industrial and residential layouts of Ikorodu, Ilopeju and Ikeja. A principled and disciplined man, Osuntikan never allocated a single plot to himself, family or friends. The historian junior brother to the minister, Professor Osuntikan wrote the first authoritative biography of Akintola titled S. Ledok Akintola, His Life and Times. In the foreword to the book, Professor Emmanuel Ayandele pointedly remarked, Akinjide Osuntikan has been more than ordinarily audacious in choosing a terrain upon which angels would fear to tread. For he has selected for analysis a political gladiator of national stature who, at the time of his murder in the coup of January 15, 1966 that toppled the First Republic, had been labelled by his political enemies in Yoruba land as a 20th century Afonja. That this leader of the opposition in the federal parliament in the last years of British colonial rule and premier of the Wild Wild West in the First Republic has been partially rehabilitated, perhaps vindicated, is clear from this professional X-ray by historian Osuntikan. By dint of this heritage, and as a student of Nigerian politics, I was sufficiently motivated to re-examine all received wisdom on the Awolowo Akintola crisis, and did my level best to arrive at objective and independent conclusions. And I was afforded the platform to do so as a columnist in leading Nigerian newspapers in the past 30 years. All writing, contends Daniel Murray, is autobiographical, that everything we write inevitably bears the imprint of our life experience that is unique to us and distinguishes our work from others. Hence I have had to rebut the orthodoxy of a generalized Yoruba-wide criminalization and demonization of Akintola. He was no saint, neither was he the devil. Prior to the externalization of the crisis, he bent over backwards to contain the differences he had with Awolowo within the ranks of the AG Yoruba leadership, including prostrating before the AG leader, but was rebuffed and ridiculed. There was no party patriarch, especially the regional governor, Uni Adesoji Aderemi, who did not counsel Awolowo that his deputy has done enough to earn his magnanimity. Towards the end of his life he would rue his intransigence against Akintola, wondering what more remorse the Premier could have shown to merit his forgiveness. He went on to attribute his rigid stance to the pressure brought to bear on him by the radical young party intellectuals. Corroboration was provided a decade later by Professor Sam Aluko. In fact, it was we who caused the problem between Akintola and Awolowo. There was a group in the university then, led by Professor Oyenuga. He was chairman of the Committee of Civil Liberty at that time. We had Professor Ojimosu, Professor Wolsoyinka, some Europeans and myself. We said, as a group, the way things were going, we must have an ideology guiding us. So, we had what we called democratic socialism, which now became the policy of the action group. So, Awo said this democratic socialism, we must try it, which he did into concrete programs like agriculture, health, roads, etc. That was exactly what caused their problem. Akintola had become premier by then, so he said, why should Awolowo be organizing people to write philosophy for the party? That when Awo was premier, they were writing for him as premier, and that since he, Akintola, had assumed the premiership, they should be writing for him. He felt that Awo was out to undermine him, and said no, things could not continue like that. I have recalled these penitent reflections, not to absolve Akintola of blame, but to give a balanced historical perspective against the backdrop that he did not survive to tell his story. Please wait for the part 2 of the tragic cycle of Yoruba history, which we shall bring to you shortly. Thanks for watching. Please share, like and subscribe. Thanks.